G20 summit is underway, and the big talking point has been the permanent inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. And we have with us Mr. Vincent Magwenya, who is the spokesperson of the President of South Africa. Sir, your first reaction, how important and significant is this development? Is this something that you were seeking continuously? And what kind of an impact will this have for the South Africa, of course, but also for the African Union?
Well, it's a very significant development, one that we have been advocating for quite some time. As you know, we did step up that advocacy last year in Bali during the G20 summit. We continued in various bilateral interactions with G20 members to advocate for the AU's inclusion into the G20. We are delighted that it has finally happened. We are grateful at the leadership that Prime Minister Modi and the Republic of India has demonstrated in this regard. This summit has been largely characterized by the efforts to bring into the G20 the voice of the Global South and to ensure much higher levels of inclusion than we've ever seen before. And so it's an important development that means a lot for the continent. It was never going to be sustainable to have a continent of more than 1.4 billion people excluded from this premier forum for international economic cooperation.
Well, you mentioned Global South, and this is a term that Indian Prime Minister Modi and Foreign Minister Jaishankar has been using continuously over the last 1 year. We've seen the emergence of this term many decades ago, but in the last 1 year, significantly this has been used continuously. Do you think this is a term that West tends to ignore a lot, and do you think the emergence of the Global South means something at a time when we have turbulent times and Third World was ignored completely? And now Global South is something that is emerging and cannot be ignored?
Well, over the past 20, 30 years or so, we've seen quite a strong emergence of the Chinese economy, the Indian economy, the Brazilian economy, and many others from the Global South that have emerged to be quite strong economies. Alongside that, we've seen an increase in the voices of those countries, and we've seen an increase in the voices of the Global South seeking more representativity and more inclusion in various global multilateral platforms. And so it's a very important development. There is recognition globally that you cannot chart an agenda for the world or a direction for the world that excludes large parts of the world, whether you're dealing with climate change or you're dealing with security issues. And so we're seeing the world coming together a lot more to tackle the various challenges that we are facing. Is there more work still to be done? Absolutely, there's still a lot of work, but there's finally that recognition. A couple of months ago, President Macron hosted an international conference on global financing. And again, similar sentiments were expressed about the ongoing need to include those voices that were excluded in the past, to reform global multilateral financial development institutions. And so we're going to see an enhancement of those processes, and that also includes the United Nations Security Council, which is long overdue for reform. The BRICS summit declared that that's one of the commitments that BRICS members made, that we need to advance our advocacy for the reform of the United Nations Security Council. So this step to have the AU included in the G20 marks the beginning of a process that we would like to see, where the Global South is included, where Africa is included, where these institutions reflect the sort of broader sentiments of the world rather than being exclusive in one way or the other.
One last question, there hasn't been any consensus on the Ukraine-Russia conflict, and at G20, India's endeavor has been for a peaceful resolution to the conflict, for talks to actually begin between the two countries, but also in the last G20, Prime Minister Modi mentioned that this is not an era of war. Do you think there will be a consensus this time around tomorrow when the New Delhi declaration or the final communique comes out? And will the communique actually come out? What do you believe?
There were similar sentiments of concern that were expressed at the beginning of the summit in Bali last year, and ultimately we ended with a text that reflected the broader sort of sentiments of the summit. We are reasonably confident that the same will happen here. India has put in a lot of commendable effort into not only the organization of the summit, but to a successful outcome of this summit. And we don't think that just that issue alone will undermine that effort. We think there will be some consensus reached. One of the differences that we have this year, which we did not have last year, is that we have a formal peace process that's aimed at resolving that conflict peacefully. It is a very complex and intractable conflict that we are confident nonetheless that will be resolved. All wars, as President Ramaphosa always say, have to ultimately come to an end, and when they do, it involves both parties in some form of dialogue. And so this year you have a peace process which you did not have last year, and that peace process has the support of all G20 members. That peace process, particularly the African Peace Initiative, has been discussed with leaders from across the world. President Modi was well briefed about it. President of China was well briefed about it, including the sort of heads of states from G7 countries. And so that development on its own should make some kind of difference in terms of how this summit approaches its wording or declaration with respect to that conflict.
Well, let's hope there is a consensus. Thank you very much for
Thank you.